O Kaito, Kaito, wherefore art thou, Kaito? Deny thy casting cost in ninjutsu, for if thou will attack, be hexproof, my love, and I'll no longer hold you back.
William Swiftspear is certainly quite the poet, I do say. Welcome, my fellow rebels, to episode 58 of the Rebelcast.
All right, welcome back to the Rebelcast. So, recent discussions in the community around Vivi bans, Cauldron bans, whichever you think will actually get banned, have gained tons of traction, obviously, on our channel, especially so. However, we're starting to now see pushback actually against the argument to ban either card. Believe it or not, even though it seems like the majority of the community is against it. But many of the arguments that we've seen centered around the idea, one of the arguments anyway, that Dimir Tempo will actually become the tier 0 deck and simply just slip into that spot if Vivi becomes absent in the meta. So let's take a look at such a world and where Dimir actually will remain on top in tier 1, but will it be able to be beat? Will it be tier 0? Let's take a look. So we're going to go through and I'm going to talk about some of the ways that Dimir is already teched out against Cauldron, obviously. Absent Cauldron, it would have to shift. We're going to talk about what gives it trouble, and we're going to talk about whether in such a hypothetical world, if the deck can pivot. So, let me just start by saying the most obvious thing, go wide strategies, token decks, those kinds of strategies do really well against Dimir traditionally, and that's been the case for some time. So, obvious to point that out. Cards like Voice of Victory take away some of the flash speed, instant speed answers, and those are included in those decks as well. And so, there are a variety of token decks out there. Athena, what do you think is the best one to sort of go after Dimir in this strategy?
I think Mono White Caretakers is really, really good into the deck. That would probably be my number one. You get to play the main deck Voice of Victory. You're kind of this grindier deck with your tokens, but you still go wide in a way that's pretty hard for Dimir to handle.
Yeah, and we're not really seeing the token decks quite as much in tier 1, right, this time around, but I mean, that's obviously because we're in a Vivi meta. Everybody wants to play Vivi. I think that's one of the big reasons. So one of the other strategies that you can employ as well is explosive big creatures, getting the big creatures out, whether you're cheating them out, with some kind of reanimation, some kind of way to cheat them out. Dimir has trouble handling the big creatures and being able to work its way around that. It really puts it on the defensive, puts it on the back foot. So that's another strategy that I think people like to employ against Dimir currently.
Yeah, especially when those creatures are backed up by something like Cavern of Souls. I think of like the Naya Unideck is something that does really well into Dimir, because if you just have your Cavern of Souls sitting on Avatar, it's really hard for the Dimir player to just counter all of your spells and out tempo you.
Absolutely. And we also have to ask the question of, in that hypothetical world, will Graveyard Hate still be around? I know Dimir isn't like a Reanimator deck or anything. It's not trying to play Cauldron to do anything like that. But it does have Enduring Curiosity. So, Rest in Peace is on the board. Enduring Curiosity cannot come back once it's removed. So, at the very least, you may not pull them out of your deck in such a world, but I think at least past game 1, you're going to be sliding them out in case of the Graveyard Hate. I hypothesize that Graveyard Hate will still be present. We're still going to have, the unit deck, for example, among others that are sort of on the outskirts of the meta. So yeah, I do think Graveyard Hate will still be around. This can present a problem for the big card advantage engine, Enduring Curiosity. What do you think?
Well, we used to see Ghost Vacuum get played in Dimir mid-range mirrors back pre-rotation. So yeah, you're not entirely wrong. I still don't think you board out Curiosity. I think the card's just way too good, and it's the reason to be playing Dimir. But yeah, I mean, Ghost Vacuum's a pretty decent card into it if you have not a lot of other stuff.
Right, right. And some other trends that I've noticed is, Dimir players have caught on to the fact that low curve sweepers give them problems. So using cards with big toughness like Preacher, we're seeing 3 ofs in the most recent list on the State of the Meta, really to cover for the fact of the X1's weakness. But that is a 3 mana value card. It kind of puts you off curve a little bit. You don't get to go into Kaito. But there are some cards already in the meta that respond to these, What do you think about sort of do you think cards like Twin Maw, Obliterating Bolt go up if Vivi goes away to tackle Dimir if it keeps doing this? How do you see that sort of cat and mouse game going with Dimir and the other decks?
I mean, Obliterating Bolt is always going to be probably the best red removal spell at that point. It'll kill the Kaito, it'll kill Curiosity and exile it, it'll kill Preacher, and it kills Elegy Acolyte, which is like a sideboard
Yep.
card they play sometimes. So I think Obliterating Bolt is probably the best example of your high damage removal that kills these things.
Yeah, I kind of thought about Twin Maw first, but yeah, Obliterating Bolt, you only need the 4 damage, 4 toughness is what you have to deal with against those cards, and it exiles, which is really great. Okay, so those are just some of the things that people are already employing. So if we're talking about a hypothetical world where Dimir's on top, that just happens even more. And so based on that, I'm not so sure that Dimir is ever really going to be a tier 0. There are still things to respond to it. But let's ask the question, just for the sake of playing devil's advocate, can Dimir actually pivot against these threats in such a world without taking too much away from its main board strategy and what it wants to do with Kaito and card advantage? So some things that we've noticed, or some things that I've noticed at least, is adding low curve sweepers. Can Dimir do this? It does have access to a couple, but of course that presents a sort of tension with its 1 mana value, 2 mana value creatures that have evasion that you want to bring in, also Flood Pits, Drowner. So presenting that sort of tension, it's really odd. Do you slide those cards out? That really takes away from your strategy, bringing in Kaito. So making the deck more defensive, I don't think is to its advantage. So that presents at least a very weird, tense situation there within the deck. You can use cards like Cecil, Azure Beastbinder, which have 3 toughness, to sort of resolve this tension a little bit if you're using sweepers that tackle 2 toughness creatures, in case you're facing off against those token decks, those low curve aggros. That is kind of a way that it can do it. What do you think, Athena? How does Dimir sort of pivot around the fact that it's going to have to tackle more of that low curve aggro?
I think it's just so hard for Dimir to deal with these go wide strategies because of the fact that some of your cards that are better into aggro, like Flood Pitch Drowner, just aren't as good when your opponent has multiple creatures at a time rather than one bigger one. And these are the types of cards that also sort of get hindered or sort of hinder your ability to use things like 0 Point Ballad.
Hmm.
So ideally, you'd want to go, oh, let's just go like Cecil and Beastbinder. Well, Beastbinder is more of a card, it's more of a tech card, right? You're using Beastbinder against cards like Abhorrent Oculus, against cards like the Soul Cauldron, against Vivi. These are the types of things you're using the Beastbinder against, and I feel like it gets a lot worse outside of those tech situations.
That's very fair. Yeah, I think there's definitely some tension there. So on graveyard strategies, obviously we have the unit deck, for example. We can see if that deck's meta share rises in the case Vivi goes away. We can see cards like Strategic Betrayal, these sort of one-sided graveyard answers where you're not obviously not Rest in Peace. It can't run Rest in Peace, but something opposite of that. I think Leyline Devotion is still in the meta, but nobody's really running it. But Strategic Betrayal, Ghost Vacuum, even like Lord Skitter as a sideboard one of, it can pivot in that direction towards those strategies. Do you think doing that, though, it takes away from its own base strategy, or does it just simply replace some of its single target removal with these cards?
I mean, first of all, I gotta call you out for calling Leyline of the Void Leyline of Devotion. I gotta call you on that one.
Thank you. I don't play
No
any of the ley
problem.
lines, so I am not familiar with which one's which color. Sorry.
It's okay. I mean, as long as Flood Maw is in the format, you're never gonna run Leyline of the Void. But in terms of the other things, yeah, I mean, Strategic Betrayal is a card we see. It's actually a really popular best of one card.
Hmm.
Surprisingly, I played like a
Hmm.
little bit of best of one ladder on Arena, and it felt
Ooh.
like I saw it everywhere. But yeah, I think that Dimir can handle a bunch of these other strategies. It's just how many of them can you handle at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it can. I guess the summary here is it can pivot towards some of these strategies, but how much does it take away from its main strategy? Though it will be able to make some adjustments, it will remain maybe not completely weak or defenseless, but it does. There is a chink in the armor here. There is like an Achilles heel from the various archetypes as well. It's not just going to be gunned down by one archetype. There are responses in various archetypes, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So, I think these are hardly the traits of a tier 0 deck. I do believe it will still remain in tier 1 at least. But as far as this argument for not banning Vivi or Cauldron because Dimir just steps into that void, I don't think so. At least that's my take.
Yeah. To clarify, I think the argument is more that they're saying if you ban something from Vivi and Cauldron, you also need to ban something from Dimir, and that's what we're arguing against.
Yes.
I think the inherent difference at the end of the day is Cauldron is a deck that's hitting you from like 3 or 4 different angles of attack at the same time, but Dimir's playing a pretty fair game plan. You play some creatures, you remove their creatures, you get this value engine going, whether it's Kaito or Curiosity, and you try to snowball the game. So if you can disrupt the value engines, or if you can kill their creatures or the engine pieces, or if you can just play your own engine piece that they can't answer very well, so you can sort of keep up with their grind ability, then those are the best ways to beat Dimir.
All right. And speaking of, let's go ahead and shift into how to beat Dimir.
So much like we did for our last video on Cauldron, we have this split into 2 different sections. One is for the cards, which are separated by color, and one is for a couple different decks you can try. So we're going to start with white. And white, I think, has the most answers for Dimir. You get Elspeth's Smite, which is a 1-mana answer to Curiosity, while also stopping the early aggression that will let a Kaito come out. You have Voice of Victory, like we talked about earlier, which will stop them from playing at flash speed. You have Clarion Conquer, which shuts off the map tokens from Siren, the Flood Pitch Drowner ability, and Kaito, which is actually a pretty decent amount of things. And you have Overlord of the Mistmoors, which, when impended, the little 2/1 flying tokens actually stop a lot of things from attacking in Dimir.
Yeah, 2 notes here. One, I totally forgot Elspeth's Smite was still in Standard, but we got it in Foundations, as you reminded me recently. So yeah, I know you're happy about that. But 2, yeah, Overlord. I didn't realize that this was a good solution because obviously gummying up the board is one of the best ways to sort of beat Dimir, or at least tempo it, keep it from doing its thing. So yeah, okay. Especially since they are flying tokens. So okay, yeah. I need to play more white.
Yeah, I mean, I have all 4 of these cards in my blue-white control sideboard for a reason. So yeah, I mean, they're all good. I feel like white's probably the best color for dealing with Dimir, but I mean, the other colors can do it too. Blue is probably the one that handles it the worst out of all of them. You do have Tishana's Tidebinder, which gets the cool little trick that you can cancel a ninjutsu, where they'll still bounce the creature back, but they won't get the Kaito on the board. And then obviously, if you hit the Kaito with it when it's using an ability, it also loses its hexproof, so you can attack it, or you can use removal on it, which I think is pretty important to kill the Kaito, especially if you're these types of slower decks, which blue tends to be. Outside of Cauldron, of course, you want the ability to shut off the Kaito. And the other blue card that I want to bring up is one that you see a lot in Dimir mid-range mirrors, is Fabloom Trick, because I feel like you can play it in more than just the Dimir mirror if Dimir becomes a tier 1 deck, or the top of the format, I should say. Decks like Is It Prowess could probably run this pretty reasonably. And Fabloom Trick's pretty good just because, again, much like Mistmoors, you gum up the board with these flying creatures that can just block everything that they attack with.
Yeah, thankfully, blue having the least amount of answers here is generally paired with another color that has even better answers, at least right now in the meta. There is no mono blue deck to my knowledge. So yeah, blue, that's okay.
For black, all of this is going to be removal. We've got Arch Enemy's Charm, which is more of a mono black spell. This lets you exile either Curiosity or Kaito, your choice. You get the End, which does the same thing as Arch Enemy's Charm does, but you can also clear all the copies out of your opponent's deck, which is a really, really big deal because those are the 2 cards they really, really want to hit on the board that help them snowball a game to victory. And then the last one is 0 Point Ballad, which is, as we mentioned, it's kind of awkward for Dimir to try to run this card. And that's why it's really good into Dimir, especially if they go back to running cards such like Flood Pitch Drowner or Deep Cavern Bat. These cards get really punished by 0 Point Ballad. It's like a 2-mana black Pyroclasm against them a lot of the time.
Yeah, we talked about that in our spoiler previews and all that. It was listed as one of our favorite cards, and for good reason. It's actually the single reason why I've stopped running Deep Cavern Bat in black. I used to love Deep Cavern Bat. I know we used to argue a little bit about the value of that card, but yeah, now I'm off it because we're seeing low curve sweepers, we're seeing fire magic, we're seeing 0 point ballad. So
Well, speaking of fire magic, if we go to red, fire magic is on there because again, it kills all the one toughness cheap creatures. And then also Nova Hellkite does the same thing while attacking the Kaito. That's something we brought up a lot during spoiler season and early on in the format. And then for the red removal spells, we've got Scorching Dragonfire and Obliterating Bolt. Dragonfire doesn't kill a lot of things, but it does exile the Curiosity at instant speed if they flash it in. Obliterating Bolt, I feel like, is the best answer to Dimir because it kills pretty much everything in their deck, including Kaito, and exiles it.
yeah, expect to see a lot of Nova Hellkites. The Red Dragons deck is running it just main board anyway, regardless of Dimir, because it just does so much damage over the course of its its lifespan on the board, coming in twice. So yeah, that card I liked it spoiler season. I like it even more now, seeing it employed in one of the tier 2, tier 1 decks.
For sure, for sure. I was surprised it got to tier 1 this week on State of the Meta, to be honest, but I mean,
Two.
it did pretty good. I'm surprised. Moving over to green, we got some more interesting options. So for an artifact, we've got Lumbering World Wagon because it kind of sets up this awkward dilemma with both their Kaito and with their Flood Pitch Drowner, where they have to keep a creature back at all times because this World Wagon will kill a Kaito. And it's so hard for them to actually deal with if they don't just catch it on the ETB with a Tidebinder. And then it also makes the Flood Pitch Drowner, I mean, vehicles in general do this, but it makes the Flood Pitch Drowner kind of awkward. If you go to threaten their Kaito or their face with a creature and they go to Flood Pits it, you can just crew it in response and attack anyways. So World Wagon's been a card I've been pretty impressed with against it. And then for creatures, Paw Patch Recruit is one that Gruul Aggro is always used to board into mid-range decks, just because you get the Offspring ability for 3 mana, it punishes single target removal really hard. And then the other card that punishes single target removal is the 3 mana Sirach, Elusive Hunter. That card, I think you draw a card whenever your stuff is targeted by spells. And against any mid-range deck or any tempo deck, it's going to be a good card, especially since it, I believe, can't be countered.
Yeah, two notes here. World Wagon, though it doesn't have trample. A lot of the decks running it find ways to give it trample and give all of its go big creatures trample. But Sirach Elusive Hunter reminds me also of a card that wasn't as good before, but I'm starting to run at least a couple of copies in my landfall. Spinner of Souls, because they're forced to target it first. So I do like that card in that deck in particular. But for the same reason, I do run a one of Sirach in the sideboard as well because I see the value in that also.
Yeah, and just as a general note, anything that says can't be countered, pretty good into Dimir. The biggest one I think is Cavern of Souls. It's one of the reasons why the unit deck is so good into it because you can just cavern your overlords out and just take over the board that way.
Yeah, don't sleep on Cavern of Souls. I think people stopped running it because nobody was really countering creature spells for a while pre-rotation, but that's back. That is happening. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So, what are some of the archetypes that you can expect to see, beating Dimir?
So the first one I'm going to pull up is It Prowess? It's by Vitor Cavallo 1, who took down a challenge this week got third place in a challenge this week running this deck. And obviously, this deck has Cauldron and Vivi in it, but I think this deck can pretty easily survive without them, especially as we see newer versions start to run things like the Sphinx, the Riddler Sphinx, Quantum Riddler. That's it. Yeah. You get to run cards like that, and plus there's there's also other good prowessy types of cards you can run. I think Planisphere being in the deck is a pretty big deal to beating Dimir, just because it can turn anything into a threat, and when you play in the mid range, that's a pretty big deal. And it sort of plays like an Is It control deck, but you get all the good red removal into Dimir rather than the kind of worse white removal into it that Azorius does.
Yeah, I also love consult the star charts here still being used, even if you have to swap something out for Cauldron, because I personally think Cauldron's going to get the ban if any of the cards do at all. You got Ral in here. Ral is a very powerful card. Steaming Sauna. It's removal plus card advantage late in the game. I think you still also can run like Proph's Identic Memory if you want. I don't know. But yeah, so Cauldron being gone doesn't necessarily mean that Is It Prowess is gone. We've already seen this deck do things without Cauldron pre-rotation. So yeah, expect to see this make a return.
The next one is my personal choice for if I was going to specifically try to beat Dimir and be mono white caretakers. So this is the list that was on State of the Meta the week before this last one that got tier 2. And I mean, this, like I said, this deck just beats Dimir really well. You have your Voice of Victory to stop what they're doing. You have your Caretaker's talent to that they can't really answer that well. That'll outgrind them. And you get a bunch of these tokens that just flood up the board. It makes their Flood Pitch Drowner awkward. The flying tokens from Mistmoors make things like Deep Cavern Bat really awkward. But those, this is the type of deck you'd want Deep Cavern Bat into, unfortunately. So yeah, I feel like mono white's really well positioned into Dimir. You can outgrind them, force them to play to your strategy, especially with the Voice of Victory, and get her done.
Yeah, and it's not afraid to run, Day of Judgment because it can rebound pretty quickly, faster than Dimir can, in creating more tokens, getting back on board. And Elspeth is a hell of a card. Like any way that you can run Elspeth, and mono white probably runs it the best. It probably complements the deck the best. So, yeah, okay. This you said this deck probably gives Dimir the most trouble. You think?
I would say so, yeah. Especially just any deck with 4 main deck Voice of Victories is going to be a pretty big problem. But on top of that, I mean, it hits it checks all the boxes of what we want, right? So yeah, this is probably my number 1 pick.
All right, We have one more.
Yeah, I've got a Gruul Landfall, which was in this last State of the Meta episode. And these landfall decks do pretty good into Dimir, mostly because of the different protection spells you have. You could always argue that there is nowhere to run to tech into them, but Overprotect gets around nowhere to run pretty well because it gives them +3/+3 on top of the hexproof and such. So yeah, I mean this deck, pretty basic game plan. You land your Chocobos, your Tifas, your Hydras, and you just try to get your landfall triggers and hit their face. And if they aim removal at your creatures, you just throw a protection spell on top of it. So yeah, pretty basic game plan, but it does pretty well. And the red splash also lets you run things like Obliterating Bolt.
Good note there, because people were just currently using it for World Souls Rage, but you can sideboard some red cards. Why not?
Mhm.
Okay, and of course, searching for lands. You can even bring in an island or a blue if you want, and run the Dragonback Assault as well, which snowballs really quickly. Okay, Overprotect. I think, like you mentioned, people are starting to run it because of nowhere to run, making a return, especially in like Esper Pixies. So yeah, I do like Overprotect. I do like this iteration as well of the deck here. I recommend running it. I have a lot of fun with it on ladder. But it is good to know. It is good to know that the large card pool. Some of us have been complaining about, including myself, but the large card pool can actually be good for standard if they can fine tune standard to be a little bit more fair, in my opinion. If you get some of the worst actors out of the way, if you get the Vivi Cauldron deck out of the way, we might actually have a healthy standard again. I mean, that's my take anyway.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Let us know in the comments what you're bringing to this weekend's events, and if you're watching this after the fact, how'd you do? And is Dimir a menace at your LGS, or is it all still just Cauldron?
And that's not all. We have 2 other great shows for you to check out. Stay the Meta, our weekly standard breakdown with data from this past week's top events, and of course the Rebel Tea House, where this week they speculate about what Wizards will actually do about Vivi, Cauldron, or both.
And until next time, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.